This is the 17th Sunday of Ordinary Time. It is episode 164 of the OLA Weekly Gospel Podcasts. Max is still behind that camera. I'm still in front of the camera, for good or bad. We are still on the campus of St. Bonaventure High School. And we are still in Matthew chapter 13, as we've been the last couple of Sundays. We are working our way through Matthew 13, where Jesus gives 7 parables, each one indicating what the kingdom of heaven and what the kingdom of God is like or can be compared to. And that's why these 7 parables in Matthew 13 are called the kingdom parables. And as we indicated, I believe it was the last podcast, that of these 7 kingdom parables, you have an introductory one, that's the sower and the soils, which he gives to the crowds. Then the next 3 ones he also gives to the crowds, those being the wheat and the weeds, which we did last week, the mustard seed and the leaven. And then the final 3 of the 7 he gives to just his disciples themselves, those being the hidden treasure, the pearl of great price, and the dragnet. And those last 3, the hidden treasure, the pearl of great price, and the dragnet, those are the 3 that this Sunday's gospel reading puts in front of us. So we are looking at another occasion where the church gives an option, a longer version and a shorter version. But unlike last week, where there was quite a difference between the two, this week, just a very slight difference. The longer version is Matthew 13, verses 44 to 52, and includes all 3 of those parables: the hidden treasure, the pearl of great price, the dragnet. That's the longer version. The shorter version is just verses 44 to 46 and includes just the first 2 of those parables, the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. So since the parables themselves are short, and since the difference between the long and the short version is so short, unlike last week when I went against my grain and I opted for the shorter rather than the longer version, and it was kind of a stop the presses moment. Well, not to worry. I'm back with my usual self, and we will opt for the slightly longer version, where Jesus where we get all 3 short parables: the hidden treasure, the pearl of great price, and the dragnet. And these 3 will conclude the 7 kingdom parables Matthew records in chapter 13, indicating to the crowds and to his disciples and to us, by extension, what the kingdom of heaven, what the kingdom of God is like. So again, they're short parables, relatively short passage. Let me read you all 3, and then we'll unpack them in that order. And again, these last 3 parables, now at this point, the first 4, the sower and the soils, the wheat and the weeds, the mustard seed and the leaven, Jesus told to the crowds. Okay? It's at this point he dismisses the crowds, and he takes his disciples off to the side, right? And he gives them these 3 parables. So these last 3 parables, he's telling just to his disciples and by extension to us. So here's how it starts. Jesus said to his disciples, here's the first one: the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field, which a person finds and hides again, and out of joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Here's the second one. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. When he finds a pearl of great price, he goes, sells all that he has, and buys it. Here's the third one. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net thrown into the sea, which collects fish of every kind. When it is full, they haul it ashore, and they sit down. They put what is good in buckets, what is bad they throw away. Thus it will be at the end of the age. The angels will go out, separate the wicked from the righteous, and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. All right, those are the 3 parables. Then he says to his disciples, "Do you understand these things?" They answered, "Yes." And he replied, "Then every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household who brings forth from his storehouse both new and old." That's the longer version, where he gives all three of the parables, short though they are. He checks to make sure his disciples understand them. They say he does. And then he wraps up by talking about every scribe that's instructed in the kingdom of heaven brings out the good and the old. Okay? So let's take a look and let's unpack those three parables. Then we'll finish the podcast by figuring out what he means when he says every scribe instructed in the kingdom of heaven brings from his storehouse the good and the old. So that's our job for this particular podcast. So we've got the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. Two parables that are distinct, obviously, but they're connected, all right? Because in both cases, let's look at the connections, the similarities, right? In both cases, a person finds something very, very valuable. In case number one, it's hidden in a field, okay? In case number two, it's something that he's searching for. So in both parables, okay, what is found is something very valuable. So valuable that the person joyfully sells everything he has in order to obtain it. So those are the similarities. But notice the differences. In the first parable, the hidden treasure, the treasure, okay, is hidden. The person is evidently in this story Jesus is given, this parable Jesus is given, a person is walking across a field and finds the treasure. You know, we don't know how he found it. We don't know the circumstances or the particulars. All we know is this treasure was hidden, and this person walking across this field wasn't necessarily searching for the treasure. He wasn't looking for the treasure, but he found it. Now, in parable number 2, you have, a little distinction. In this parable, the individual, the merchant, is searching for this very valuable pearl, okay? So in both cases, you've got a treasure, the treasure or the pearl. In both cases, you've got something very valuable, something so valuable each person sells everything they have in order to obtain it. But the difference is, in the first parable, this treasure of value, the person wasn't searching for it, but wound up finding it. In the other parable, the merchant, the person, was searching for it and found it. And of course, Jesus is saying, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like, all right? So this treasure in the field, this pearl of great price, this thing that was so valuable, that is the kingdom of heaven. That is the gospel. That is Jesus, right? And in the first parable, all right, it's like a person that is kind of like the guy was walking through the field. It's like a person going through his life, not necessarily searching for Jesus, not necessarily searching for God, the gospel, right, the good news, but finding it. And then once he's found it, he realizes its great value, and then he sells everything in order to obtain it. Now, in this case, the selling everything, once this person who wasn't necessarily looking for God, looking for Jesus, looking for the gospel, right, but winds up finding it, what he does is he realizes its great value and turns away from his former life, turns away from sin and towards God, towards the gospel. So the selling part of it is the turning away from the former life and turning to a life oriented towards God, a life oriented towards Christ, all right? And this first parable kind of denotes the person going through life, not necessarily searching, but finding anyway, finding just the grace, by the grace of God, okay? The second parable is that person that is searching, okay? The person might not necessarily know or realize he's searching for God or Jesus or the gospel, but he's searching for something more. He knows that, his life, the way he's living it, the things he's indulging in to satisfy himself, they're not working. They're not satisfying, okay? There's got to be something more. And he's searching for that something more. Now he may, and he finds that something more is God, is Christ, is the gospel. And then when he finds it, like this merchant did with this pearl of great price, again, the merchant sells everything to obtain it. So this guy who's been searching for something more and finds out the more is God, is Christ, is the gospel, once he finds it, then again, he turns away from his former life and embraces the life of Christ, right? So these two parables, similar in that you've got this thing, this treasure, this pearl, that's so valuable that people sell everything they have once they have it. And in the first case, they weren't necessarily searching for it. They found it. And in the second case, they were searching for it. So you've got those two individuals, right? The individual that's not necessarily looking for God in any sort of deliberate or intentional way, but nevertheless finds him. And the person that is looking for something more, okay, and finds that something more is God. And then, interestingly enough, okay, Jesus gives one additional parable, the parable of the dragnet, right? And again, it's a separate parable from the previous two, but if you look at it, it kind of connects with the other two in that it kind of puts a summary or a cap on the other two. And of course, the parable of the dragnet, again, you've got, and again, going back to first century, if you were a commercial fisherman, if you made your living fishing, right, you'd take your boat out into the middle of the sea, and you'd have this huge net, okay, that would be weighed down on each of the corners. You would toss this huge net into the sea, all right, and you'd wait there. And like the parable says, all kinds of fish find their way into the net. The good, the bad, the ugly, so to speak, right? So you let the net fill up with fish, and then at the end of the day, right, you drag that net back onto the boat. You take the boat to the shore. You drag the net onto the shore, and then you separate the good fish from the bad fish, all right? Well, the sea is the world, right? And in the world, you've got good and bad, right? And again, just like we saw with the wheat and the tares, right? The fishermen don't separate it until they get to the shore. They let the good and the bad mingle together in that same net. Then they drag it to the shore, and then they do the separation. So that's one way the dragnet connects up with the parable from last week. But the other way is, and kind of an analogy here, is for us, right? When we, because with our baptism and strengthened through our confirmation and nourished by the Eucharist, right? We are to go out and evangelize. We're to proclaim Christ, preach the gospel, build the kingdom of God, right? And using kind of a pun or an analogy, when we evangelize, what this parable is suggesting to us on that level is that we cast a wide net, right? We evangelize to everybody, just like the fishermen put out that net, right? And they let all sorts of fish come into it. when we evangelize, we should cast a wide net, right? Knowing that some people will accept the message and some people won't, all right? But our job is not to do the separating. God will do that, right? Our job is to cast as wide of a net as we can and evangelize as widely as we can, because we never know who's going to wind up accepting it and who's going to wind up rejecting it. And when we encounter, and here's the connection with the previous two parables, when we evangelize with that wide net, maybe some of the people that come into that net, so to speak, will be maybe some of the people we come across and we evangelize to, maybe they wouldn't even be searching for God or even thinking about God or considering God, like that guy just walking through the field, right? But then we talk about God to them, and all of a sudden they realize, hey, maybe this is something I should take seriously. Okay, other people that we may come across in our wide net of evangelizing, excuse me, maybe they are searching, and maybe they don't even know what they're searching for, but they're searching, and now they encounter us, and they realize what they've been searching for all along is God, right? So when we cast that wide drag net of evangelizing, parable 3, we don't know who we might encounter. We might encounter the guy in the first parable who's walking through the field, not necessarily searching for the treasure, but finds it and embraces it. And we might find that person that is searching, the merchant in the second parable, and finally realizes what he's searching for is God. So because we never know, we should evangelize with a wide net, right? We should, as I say in other instances, give God our 5 loaves and 2 fish, put those in his hand, and let him do what he wills. So it's an interesting 3 parable set that have similarities yet are distinct, and the dragnet one kind of ties in and caps off the previous 2. Now let's move to the very last part, where when he talks, he asks his disciples, do you understand it? The disciples say yes. And then Jesus says something curious, right? He says, well, if that's the case, okay, then every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household who brings from his storehouse both new and old. Now, when you hear the word scribe, in the narrow sense, you're thinking of the scribes and Pharisees, right? And the scribes were basically the theologians of the day, right? They were the ones that translated the scriptures. They're the ones that expounded and taught the scriptures. So when we see that word scribe or hear that word scribe, we immediately think of the scribes and Pharisees, right? But in a larger sense, the scribes were teachers of the law. In a larger sense, now again, he's talking to his disciples, right? And he says, who have been instructed in the kingdom of heaven. Well, what's Jesus just been doing in these 7 parables? He's been instructing his disciples about the kingdom of heaven. So he's not talking about just the scribes and Pharisees. He's talking about any, quote, scribe, any teacher, be it the disciples then or us now, okay? When the teacher teaches, them then and us now, to bring out of our storehouse both new and old, okay? Because we know the Old Testament, Augustine's great quote, the New Testament is hidden in the Old, and the Old is revealed in the New. It's one book, the Bible. It's one story, the story of salvation history, and it all fits together. The Old Testament points to the New, specifically to Jesus, right? So when you're teaching, you want to teach the full counsel of God. You want to teach the fullness of the story of salvation history. You want to teach the fullness of the gospel. Now, the householder he's talking about, okay, specifically what that would relate to back then is if you were a householder, right, and you had some artifacts and you had some things that you had collected, and you were inviting guests over, you would often set out some of your collectibles, some of your artifacts for the guest to look at and admire. And of course, you wouldn't set out all of them. You'd select certain ones. And back then, the householder would select some of his older ones and some of his newer ones to give kind of a broad-based presentation of his collectibles, of his artifacts, okay? So that's on the natural level what that's talking about. But on the spiritual level, be the scribes being the disciples themselves or us, right? We want to teach the full faith, the fullness of God, okay? The easy sayings and the difficult ones, the ones people will agree with, the ones maybe they won't agree with, right? Because again, it's God's gospel, not ours. So with that, 21 minutes. Hopefully we've worked our way through these three parables and that interesting saying at the end in a somewhat understandable fashion. And this finishes off those 7 kingdom parables that Matthew records in chapter 13 that we've been looking at the past couple of Sundays and the past couple of podcasts. So with that, a little bit of a teaser. Next Sunday, we move out of chapter 13 of Matthew into chapter 14, and we get Matthew's very, very short recording of the feeding of the 5,000. The lengthy one we know is in John's Gospel. A much shorter recording is in Matthew's Gospel, but short as it is, it has some nuggets that we'll unpack next week. Little teaser there for you. So with that, I will let you go. And until next week, as always, I'm Charles Merritt. Take care and God bless.